Although of course shooting and grappling are major elements in playing the woods, what really gives you the flexibility is the relational action table. And this is how models interact with each other on the table, how your models react as a team, and also how they react towards your opponent's models. The basis of a lot of the relational actions are speaking actions. Okay, so they're either a whisper to a model in base contact, talking to a model within your presence range, which is your strength plus your wisdom, or shouting to a model that's further afield within twice your presence range. And if other models can hear, then they get to react as well. So, shouting subtle orders across the battlefield is sometimes not a wonderful idea. But talking and whispering are good ways of directing your troops, particularly if you've got high decisiveness models and you've got low decisiveness models, and you want your low decisiveness models to act earlier on in the turn or to get multiple activations. Because one thing that you can do with your speaking actions is you can issue an order. So you can order a model to immediately refresh their stamina, activate, and take a turn. That doesn't mean they don't get their activation next time. You can have multiple activations. You can even order a model successive times with different models if you've got them. But it's obviously using up your stamina with the models that you're performing the orders with. You can also use speaking actions to coerce your opponent's models. So you can intimidate them by using your menace scores. And menace works not only off the individual model stats, but also what your enemy can perceive. So for example here, the Booker can't perceive any more of its friendly models. There aren't any of its friendly models anywhere near it, but it can perceive an additional enemy model. So the intimidating model would get +1 to its menace value for having another enemy. If there were 2 enemies, it would get +2. If there were 3 enemies, it would get +3. So ganging up on models to intimidate them is a good tactic, especially if you're perhaps a more squishy warband facing a powerful foe, and you don't want them to get close enough to get into combat. You can shield some of your weaker models by intimidating and forcing your opponent back. The more you win an intimidate attempt by, the more stamina that it gives you to move your opponent's models away. The other thing you can try and do is charm your opponent's models. Charming is more difficult, but if you're successful, you get to activate and do anything that you like with the opponent's model. It doesn't mean that you take it permanently off your opponent. Your opponent will still get to activate with it at its next activation point, but you essentially get a free activation with the model that you have coerced. Another thing that you can do with relational actions is you can go on the alert. So if you've got a high decisiveness model and you don't want it to act yet, but it doesn't have a skill to allow it to defer its action, you can make it go on the alert. The next time that it perceives something happening, it will be able to immediately activate and take its activation, take some actions. So it's just waiting for something to happen. The next thing that you do when it has spotted something happening, it can be to go back on the alert. So you don't have to respond to everything that's going on around you, but every time you go back on the alert, it's costing stamina. So the longer the model is on the alert before it does something, the less stamina it's going to have available to do something when it reacts to the thing that you want it to react to. But it can be a good precautionary measure. If you're aware that an enemy model is posing a threat, putting a couple of models on the alert around it will let you perhaps intimidate your opponent a little bit into not bringing the model any closer. You can also do things like riding with relational actions. In this case, we don't have any mounted figures, but riding a figure is a relational action that usually requires an expenditure of stamina in order to control the mount. But then you're getting benefits from the mount being able to move further than you would be able to, or you're getting extra strength or extra attacks in a grapple. You can also interact with scenery. So, for example, the herbalists will be able to pick herbs from around the board with interact actions. There's an action that allows you to snatch an item of equipment from another model. And interact actions can also be used as just a general catch-all that come into play with various skills and pieces of equipment. Magic in the woods is called Fateweaving, and rather than sort of throwing magic missiles at your enemies, bringing up balls of flame and that kind of thing, this is to do with shaping the fate and the destiny of the models on the table. So Fateweaving almost always targets other models and lets them do things or prevents them from doing things, rather than inflicting direct damage upon them. There are two types of Fate Weavers. There are augurs, so my Fae here, for example, is an augur. These are people who are innately able to shift fate around them. They may not know why they're doing it or how they're doing it. They may just have a knack for it, or they may be well aware that they have this kind of ability to them. The other type of Fate Weaver is the Geomancer. This is somebody who has studied the flow of fate and has trained themselves to be able to shape fate, and it usually takes them a bit longer because they have to go through rituals in order to do so. The Fate Weaver action table is obviously only available to Fate Weavers, so Geomancers and Augurs. And Fate Weaving is quite costly. In most cases, the Fate Weaver has to be able to see the model that it's targeting, and it will spend an amount of stamina plus its perception for augurs or its wisdom for geomancers, and that will allow it to pick from the Fate Weaver table a power up to that value. Not many Fate Weaver actions will be accessible within one turn to most Fate Weavers. So the other thing that Fate Weavers can do is they can gather their stamina. So they can spend a turn either meditating or drawing sigils, or casting runes, or rolling bones, or whatever they're doing in preparation for casting, and that lets them bank their stamina for that turn for use in a following turn. And you can spend a number of turns gathering your stamina for Fate Weaving, provided that you aren't distracted. If you have to spend stamina on anything else, you lose your banked stamina. So while a Fate Weaver is gathering, it's important to defend them with the rest of your warband so that they can get a Fate Weaving power off. There are three modes that you can play the woods in. There's roleplay mode, skirmish mode, and battle mode. In roleplay mode, you have one model, or you might have a couple of models, who represent your characters, and you're playing with a GM who's leading you through an adventure. And we recommend that any fights, any encounters, sort of specific scenarios are played out with miniatures on the tabletop using the regular Woods rules. But there are rules in the rulebook for Theatre of the Mind adventuring. So your stats will be used in order to go against difficulties set by the GM in various tasks. The second mode is skirmish mode, so you play with a warband that you've picked from warband lists within the rulebook. And there, each game you pick an objective, and your opponent picks an objective, and you're trying to score points based on how close you get to your objective, how well you prevent your opponent from achieving their objectives. And you can play your warband games as one-offs, or you can play them within a campaign. If you play them with a campaign, there's development rules and injury rules, and your warbands can grow and evolve and develop and change leadership and take territories and all kinds of fun things. And then there's battle mode, which is if you want to play massed units fighting against each other. So you still have characters. Typically you'll have one character per army who represents the army leader or general, or perhaps a special magic user who's moving around. And they have an influence over your own units, but they're very vulnerable to your opponent's units. And then you have a number of units that are on large bases that can move around the battlefield, very much in the same way as the regular Woods rules. except that your units will have an additional discipline stat, which can be used, or which is used, to decide whether they can move, whether they can perform certain actions. And the game is fully scalable, so you can start off with a roleplay character, then they can become the leader of a warband, or perhaps just a member of a warband, and then your warband can form a unit in a larger battle game, or you can play it the other way. So from a battle game, you might have a lone survivor who enters a roleplay campaign to gather a skirmish warband around them and take vengeance. So it's perfectly scalable. Everything uses the same set of stats. You can move between the levels as you like.